Minnesota Vikings interest in drafting a quarterback. Not as much smoke as we thought. Before we start our video today on future Minnesota Vikings quarterbacks, we want to talk about a Minnesota Vikings quarterback of the past. We found out today the unfortunate passing of Minnesota Vikings quarterback Joe Kapp, quarterback the team from 1967 to 1969. Brought the Minnesota Vikings to Super Bowl IV, the team's first Super Bowl in franchise history. Obviously, they lost that game, but the man was known as a phenomenal leader. Was one of those guys, I believe, said 40 for 60, 40 players, 60 minutes, never putting one man above the team. Obviously, our thoughts are with the Kapp family at this time.
Yeah, man. I mean, lost some legends recently. Lost some absolute Vikings legends. So
yeah,
let's put on a season for them next year.
After the Vikings decided not to move up in the draft to draft a quarterback, as well as passing on Will Levis at pick 23, us Vikings fans, we really thought like, oh, Kwesi got us. All the smoke about them being aggressive for a quarterback and them wanting a quarterback this year and having a potential successor to Kirk Cousins, as well as like not giving him the extension and everything, and kind of just sticking with the 1 year left on his contract. We all thought it was all a bunch of smoke. We're not going to do anything. And now we're kind of in no man's land here. But we found out today, Tom Pelissero joined the Pat McAfee show, and he was talking about the Vikings' interest in quarterback. Obviously, Tom Pelissero works for NFL Network, grew up in Minnesota, probably actually a Vikings fan, though he can't say it because he's an insider, and you gotta remain neutral. But we all know Minnesota boy, he's a Vikings fan, right?
Right.
So this is a tweet coming from Vikes Insider from Tom Pelissero today on the McAfee show. The Vikings were making calls about moving up very high in the draft and had the idea to do so if Bryce Young didn't get selected the first overall pick. And my understanding is that it was for one player, and that was Bryce Young. Also went on to say that after Bryce Young went number one, they switched the focus to building the offense, getting another weapon for the team this year, and potentially a quarterback down the road. So this really does bring us to the point of what are we going to do next year, right? I mean, and there's so now, like after hearing this, I personally think there's a good chance that they aim that way. And obviously, we're going to be picking low, I have a feeling, because Kirk Cousins, no matter what you say about him, I think he's going to have another good season. The guy's going to get us at least 8-9 wins, so we're not going to be picking top 10. But I think there is a good chance that if they were going to be that aggressive for a guy like Bryce Young, I think they could be just as aggressive in 2024.
Yeah, I want to say right away, you were talking about the smoke stuff. Like, there's us trading up for Will Levis at number 2, which was like the craziest smoke ever since he was there for 23 and passed him up on him. One thing I want to say about this Bryce Young thing, other than the fact that it shows that we were going to be willing to be aggressive to go grab our quarterback, in my opinion, Bryce, and I've said it before on our podcast, Bryce Young was the one quarterback in this draft that I thought was by far the best. And if that was going to, I know we said Stroud a little bit, but if I was going to move up to grab one quarterback for sure and give up a lot of assets, it would have been for Bryce Young. So it's kind of refreshing knowing that's what the Vikings would have also done. So they're doing their homework. They didn't look at the other prospects and were like, they're worth moving all the way up for. And I think Bryce Young was the guy that potentially could have happened. I think it was, probably pretty obvious for them earlier on that Carolina probably is going to go with him number 1. But you never know. And just like you said, the fact that we were going to move all the way up, I'm assuming if Bryce Young was there at number 2, it does show a lot of like, what will we do next year? Will we be aggressive next year? If there's one of these players, and we can even bring them up here right now. So yeah, any of these players, we got Caleb Williams, May, and I can never say his name,
Quinn Ewers, yep.
Quinn Ewers.
Plus more.
There's more. We just picked 3. We picked 3, but obviously headed by Caleb Williams as far as we know right now, unless anything happens during the season. So there's some studs going into the draft. And what does that mean? Like, so next year in the draft, it makes it seem a lot more obvious. We are willing to give up a lot to go get our guy. As you were talking about prior to this, it really matters as who's at the top spot, especially if we're going to go after a guy like Caleb Williams or May. Like, what team do we need to be there at 1? Because we know for sure, I'll bring up one thing, I'll let you take this over, but one thing we don't want for sure is Chicago to go in there. Chicago has Carolina's pick, and they obviously have their own pick. So if they end up if Carolina's the worst team or the Bears are the worst team, obviously they're not going to trade to us. So I think that's one thing. But do you have any other teams that you're looking at in that position?
Right. And I think like if you go and try to do, I watched one guy do a way too early 2024 mock draft. And it was interesting because it kind of went off reverse odds to win the Super Bowl. So obviously the team with the 2 lowest odds. So if it ends up being where Arizona and Houston are the worst 2 teams in the league, that leaves Arizona with the top 2 picks in the draft.
Yeah.
And what really matters in that scenario is how they feel about Kyler Murray. Because he's making a ton of money right now with the contract they paid him, I'm sure he would still be tradable. He still has value. And I think part of the reason that they're probably not going to be very good is he's not going to play majority of the season due to how late he tore his ACL last season. So it really all depends. And you really don't feel like with how much they're paying a guy like Kyler Murray, you don't really feel like they would pass up on the opportunity to get a Caleb Williams, especially if this season goes as well as people are thinking it's going to go for him. I mean, just winning the Heisman, I don't see how it can't go as well as people are hoping.
Yeah.
But if they are sold on Kyler Murray, they could get a haul for the number 1 overall pick. And I think part of the Vikings reasoning this last year, they weren't going to trade up to number 1 because Carolina was dead set. Like Bryce Young.
They already did it.
But if they look at Arizona and Arizona's like, we're open for business here, the fact that they were willing to make a move up for a guy like Bryce Young, who everybody thought was the top guy in this draft, this just shows that I think they would be open to trading up to get a Caleb Williams at number 1 if they're that dead set on finding their guy.
Yeah.
So I just think it all depends. I mean, if Arizona and Houston are 1-2, or they could, I mean, if they're sold on Caleb Williams, the Vikings really like Drake May, for example, who a lot of people are kind of comparing his play style to a guy like Justin Herbert. You can move up to 2, and that's would be a little bit cheaper, but obviously still going to cost you quite a bit because Arizona knows what you're coming up for. But in that scenario, Arizona is going to be in the driver's seat. But I would like to see Kwesi make an aggressive move up the board, and I think everything from what we've heard sounds like that is very well possible. Now,
especially
we'll know by that time, and that's the big thing going into that draft. We'll know because at that point, it's either Kirk Cousins will have an extension or he won't, and if he doesn't, then then we're open for business and things get interesting after that. So
it might be a situation
where you have to.
It might be a situation where you have to do what the Panthers did this year. You might have to just trade for the first or second pick early. If this happens and we don't want to give Kirk that extension, I think that's the play, and not let it'd been interesting to see if Panthers didn't do that. It would have been interesting to see would we have tried to trade up to the number 1 spot this year, and because it was really obvious. Obviously, the Panthers taking a quarterback, they have to, and is pretty obvious that it was probably going to be Bryce Young, which it was,
right, for sure.
So I mean, yeah, I don't know, man. It's crazy. It's exciting though. It's exciting because now you just know for sure that Kwesi is willing to make that move for the right quarterback. That's the key thing. The right quarterback. It can't just be any quarterback. Right, I didn't think we're going to move up to the 3rd spot for Anthony Richardson, who is you have no idea who he's going to be as a quarterback. But if you're going to trade a lot of assets, you go get a guy that you think is going to be a for sure thing, even though Bryce Young isn't an absolute for sure thing, but only because of his size, really. I think he's going to be really good. And I think you're going to get more of those type of for sure things in next year's quarterback class. And it's probably going to be a better time for us to try to make that move. But yeah, man, I mean, it's just exciting to know, Kwesi's he's going to be willing to do it. That's what the news at the end of the day, that's what it means. I know we missed out on Bryce Young this time, but it means going into the next draft, the Vikings probably aren't going to mess around to go grab their quarterback that they like.
I mean, and as you mentioned earlier, these 3 plus there's more. You got Bo Nix out of Oregon, JJ McCarthy out of Michigan, as well as some others. Obviously, we're not like major college football guys, but I know those are the names that I'm kind of hearing as potential first-round guys. I saw a way too early mock draft where McCarthy was mocked to the Vikings at 20, whatever they'd be picking based on Super Bowl odds. But yeah, it's just all of this says to me that it wasn't as much smoke as we thought. And I do think the Vikings are going to be aggressive next season. I think the fact they took Jaren Hall this year is showing that they want to start trying to develop the quarterback position. I don't think that the news that they were intrigued by the idea of a quarterback on the rookie deal. I 100% believe that all now after this news. And I don't know, man. I think next year's gonna be really interesting. Like I said, I think Kirk Cousins is gonna have a phenomenal season this year. I think he's gonna play just as well as he did last year. But yeah, it might not matter. Like I said before, we'll know by the time the draft rolls around. If he's extended, then they're not gonna. Maybe they wouldn't risk it all. But if he's not, they might need to go all in for this quarterback.
Yeah, I don't think they're gonna be sitting at 21 to wait for a quarterback. That's what
Right.
this shows me. It shows me that they're not gonna mess around. They're gonna go grab the quarterback that they think is really good.
Absolutely.
Not just like that's what it shows with the Bryce Young thing. You're not even gonna do that for Shroud. So you're going or Anthony Richardson. So
Or Will Levis,
you're
23
making
even.
or obviously Will Levis.
Mhm.
You're going to go grab the quarterback that you want, the one that you feel like. I mean, people call Caleb Williams a generational talent. If Arizona is there and they're still in on Kyler Murray, like I think the Vikings are willing to do what it takes to go get that kind of player instead of
Absolutely.
waiting it out and taking a risk and the guy drop to them, that kind of thing. You're just getting a guy that you're not 100% sure on, which
Right.
is just nice to know. I
Mhm.
think.
And they've already started getting the inside info by drafting Jordan Addison this season. So
Yeah,
obviously,
exactly.
as Pelissero said, that was the guy that they targeted after Bryce Young was off the board. One to get their
Yep.
impact offensive player for the next quarterback coming in next year's draft. But
Let's go.
anyway, Minnesota Vikings interested in Bryce Young. What is the outlook going to be in the 2024 draft? The quarterback, we want to know your guys' thoughts on this. Let us know those down in the comment section, and we'll see you guys next time on the GG Sports Podcast.
Skol Vikes.